Audio check, audio check, audio check.
Hello, thank you very much for joining us tonight. We're going to get started at 6:30, so in just a couple of minutes. Hello again, thank you for joining us tonight. I see that people are still arriving, so we will give it a few more minutes before we kick off the meeting. Again, thanks again for joining us.
Eric, I think the council member is not coming. You know that already?
Yes.
Okay.
Thank you, Borough President, and good to see you.
Okay, as long as you know.
Yes, thanks a lot. Okay, we're going to go ahead and get started. Welcome. And my name is Eric Boxford. I am the Deputy Director of the Manhattan office at the New York City Department of City Planning. Thank you very much for joining us tonight for the third of our public informational sessions on the SoHo NoHo neighborhood planning process. This event is hosted by the Department of City Planning in partnership with Manhattan Borough President Gail Brewer and Councilmember Margaret Chin. We've already had two very productive sessions dedicated to kicking off the planning process in SoHo and NoHo, and another focusing on housing in these two neighborhoods. Tonight's session will focus on the unique mixed-use nature of NoHo and SoHo and quality of life in neighborhoods where residents, workers, and businesses coexist in close proximity. Our final public informational session will take place on March 30th and will focus on arts and culture in SoHo and NoHo, and we hope you'll join us for that event as well. Tonight's event is organized into three sections: introductory remarks, a short presentation, and then a question and answer session where representatives from city agencies will answer your questions live. Joining me tonight is a familiar face for many from the Department of City Planning, Sylvia Lee, our project lead. We're also joined by Jennifer Santines from the Department of Transportation, and from the Department of Sanitation, Greg Anderson and Justin Bland. Again, thank you very much for joining us tonight. Your participation in this process and input are key to the crafting of this very important proposal. And now I'm very happy to introduce Borough President Gail Brewer for introductory remarks.
Thank you very much, Eric. And I want to thank your department. You and Edith and Sylvia have put a great deal of time into this. And I certainly want to thank Transportation and Sanitation. We are all in neighborhoods talking about this issue of mixed use and public realm. But I think in SoHo, NoHo, you have a small, wonderful sidewalks, a lot of pedestrians pre-pandemic, and I'm sure they'll be back post-pandemic. And you also have the most wonderful art / stores / commerce / buildings. It's a very special area. And so if we can solve the problems of mixed use and public realm and quality of life in SoHo, NoHo, we can do it anywhere. These discussions are incredibly important. We need open space. We need efficient pedestrian, vehicle traffic, and sanitation. At the same time, we need a safe and healthy neighborhood. And one of the ways you do that is to think about this public realm issue. I think in SoHo, NoHo, and the business community knows this better than anyone, as do the residents. It's clear that the city needs to prioritize working with store owners and the owners of building for the best practices for trash storage, for deliveries, and for parking. I was on a Zoom the other day and somebody talked about trash cans coming out of the sidewalk. I don't know, but I'm letting you know others are thinking about this topic, but my money is on you. I know that you'll talk about all these things tonight. I do think that we need to add to that, just thinking who is going to coordinate while we're talking about these good ideas. Who is the public realm czar who's going to figure out how to coordinate these good suggestions? So we know that this is one of the public meetings to talk about the draft scope of work for this SoHo, NoHo discussion. We've talked about housing and other topics. And as you said earlier, Eric, March 30th is on arts and culture, another aspect of this fabulous neighborhood. So I'm glad that there are so many people participating every single meeting from when we first started this as a discussion with a facilitator talking about SoHo, NoHo and its future, all the way to now. I want to thank everybody in the neighborhood on all sections, of all arguments and philosophies and points of view, because your participation means a lot. So thank you, City Planning, for taking the lead, and thank you everyone who's really committed to figuring out what quality of life in a positive mixed use in the public realm really means, because not everybody has put the time in that you're putting in tonight. Thank you very much.
Zaki, would you like to join the conference right now?
Hi, good evening, everyone. My name is Saki Ng, Land Use Review, Department of City Planning. Before we begin, please note Cantonese and Mandarin translators will be available to assist tonight. 大家好，喺今晚個提問環節，我可以幫你翻譯廣東話。如果你需要廣東話，我可以幫你翻譯廣東話問題同埋回答。Sylvia，我個同事可以幫你翻譯普通話。
Thanks, Saki. So I'm Sylvia Lee, the project lead of SoHo NoHo Neighborhood Plan at the Department of City Planning. The borough president said it best. Thank you all for taking the time to participate. It means a lot to us. Tonight, I'll also assume the role as the Mandarin speaking staff support. 感谢您参加今晚的活动。在提问环节，如果您需要用普通话提问，我会帮您翻译问题和回答。您也可以通过电子邮件的方式和我们联系。Next slide, please. Before we dive in, as usual, a few housekeeping notes. Similar to previous info sessions, we'll start with a presentation and then dedicate the rest of the meeting to answer as many questions as possible related to tonight's theme. During the presentation, you can again submit your questions in writing by using the Zoom Q&A feature. Once we start the live Q&A session, you will then have an additional option to ask questions by raising your hand in the Zoom platform or by pressing *9 on your phone. We'll call on people in the order of when their hand is raised. And when your name is called, you will be able to unmute yourself and have the option to turn on your camera. As before, we'll alternate between written questions and those who want to ask a question verbally. Next slide, please. After the presentation, the chat feature will also be enabled, like the last session, last session, so that you can interact with other attendees. The technical hotline info can be found at the bottom of every slide in case you run into any issues. Next slide, please. So here's what our presentation will cover. I will provide an overview of ways in which the neighborhood plan will strengthen SoHo NoHo's unique mixed-use character and the local economy. I'll then turn it over to my colleagues at the Department of Transportation and the Department of Sanitation to talk about how their programs and initiatives may inform the discussion of quality of life and public realm improvements in SoHo NoHo. Next slide, please. We'll do our best to answer the relevant zoning, quality of life questions during and after the presentation. On the slide here are just some examples of the more frequently asked questions we hope to cover today. Next slide, please. As Eric has already alluded to, tonight's session is the second one of a series of public events to flesh out different aspects of the neighborhood plan. I'll reiterate that the neighborhood plan is a work in progress. Your questions and feedback tonight will continue to shape the plan as it comes together. And we thank you again for taking the time to stay involved. Next slide, please. So jumping in on the neighborhood plan. Next slide. As we've covered in numerous occasions previously, the existing manufacturing zoning in SoHo NoHo is obsolete. And to be frank, it has been obsolete for quite some time. A quick rundown on how the zoning is outdated. Generally speaking, retail, restaurants, commercial galleries, and most other types of storefront tenants you see on the ground floors of SoHo NoHo are not permitted without approvals from the city on a case-by-case basis. Even though these businesses bring such life to our street, provide jobs, contribute to our economy, and deserve our support, especially now. What is less talked about is that the manufacturing zoning designation, actually the premise that this is a manufacturing district, also means that most community facilities that are considered residential amenities, such as community centers, libraries, schools, and et cetera, are generally not allowed. And while some accommodations exist in zoning for museums and nonprofit art galleries, which is unique to the M15A and B zoning, because it's still a manufacturing district, the allowance is really fairly limited. This really contradicts the community's desire to support arts and culture and carry SoHo's arts legacy forward. At the last session, we already covered how the existing zoning hinders housing access and equity, and I'll not repeat here tonight. A sentiment that we've heard echoed by businesses, property owners, small and large, as well as owners of small co-ops, is that these outdated restrictions act as real barriers and impediments to opening, sustaining, and operating businesses in these neighborhoods. And the special permit and variance processes are challenging to navigate and costly to pursue. And from our perspective, these outdated, rigid, and onerous regulations also have neighborhood-wide consequences. Next slide, please. To put it quite simply, the zoning that has been in place for the last 5 decades is really a reflection of another era and needs to be updated to reflect the robust mixed-use district SoHo NoHo is today, and also to look forward so that these neighborhoods can remain great places to live, work, and visit. But before I talk more about the economic imperatives for the neighborhood plan, which is important, I want to take the time to highlight SoHo NoHo's unique mixed-use character and acknowledge the real challenges it brings. SoHo NoHo is not, and never was, a primarily residential neighborhood where commercial activities are limited, if any, nor is it an exclusively commercial or manufacturing area where businesses can operate without regard for residents as neighbors. In SoHo NoHo, residents and businesses intimately mingle across the neighborhood, on the same block, in the same building, and sometimes on the same floor. This is special and dynamic, but also create conflicts, at least opportunities for conflicts. So we've heard loud and clear that this is a challenge for residents, particularly for those who live along or near the Broadway corridor. And tonight's session is designed to focus our collective attention on these important public realm issues, as the borough president mentioned. That being said, it is our view that as we engage in the discussion about quality of life, we don't lose sight of SoHo NoHo's contribution to our city as a unique urban experience, as well as economically. As detailed on the slide, the district as a whole provides tens of thousands of jobs, generates millions of dollars of tax revenues, serves New Yorkers as a place to shop and just simply to be, and is admired and celebrated around the globe. And we should be proud of that and support that. Next slide, please. As further illustrated here, SoHo NoHo provides not only a large number of jobs, but a large number of jobs concentrated within a small geographic area. And by the measure of job density, which is number of jobs per square mile on this map, SoHo NoHo ranks only behind Midtown and Lower Manhattan. From our perspective, zoning policies for SoHo NoHo, therefore, should reflect and sustain SoHo NoHo's status as a regional hub for jobs and commerce. And sort of connecting it back to what we talked about in the last session, introducing more housing and affordable housing in SoHo NoHo would also bring New Yorkers closer to jobs, opportunities, and at the same time strengthen demands for a wider variety of businesses and services in these neighborhoods, including shops for daily needs. Next slide, please. I don't think it is an exaggeration to say that the zoning in SoHo NoHo has been noted as being outdated long before our current planning process. This particular moment we're in, though, makes maintaining the status quo and keeping the barriers in place all the more unacceptable. As we build back our post-pandemic city to be more fair, equitable, and economically resilient, we do need to modernize the zoning, level the playing field for small businesses, and create the flexibility that is needed so that there's room for change and innovation as the city recovers. Next slide, please. So how will the SoHo NoHo neighborhood plan accomplish that? As we've noted in prior sessions, the overall goal on the economic mixed use and quality of life side is to, on one hand, carry forward what we've heard from the business community during Envision SoHo NoHo to allow a wider range of uses that bring vibrancy and jobs. And at the same time, collaborate with agencies, local partners, and the communities to find opportunities to better manage the public realm. As described in prior meetings, it is contemplated that the existing zoning will be replaced by a series of mixed-use zoning districts where a wider range of uses, including commercial, residential, community facility uses, will be permitted on an as-right basis. This would mean that the onerous ad hoc special permit processes would no longer be necessary to locate retail, food stores, restaurants, and other types of storefront uses on the ground floor. This also means that SoHo NoHo, as neighborhoods where people live, will have the commensurate zoning provisions that allow local businesses and community facilities that serve residents. We've already covered housing in the last session, and as well as JLWQA, Joint Living Work Quarters for Artists, and we'll talk more about arts and culture and JLWQA in the next session. Next slide, please. In addition to those use allowances on the previous slide, the neighborhood plan will also put in place provisions to strengthen Broadway as a hub for jobs and commerce, while holistically considering retailers, office tenants, and residents' needs. One point of clarification here, and this is a question that came up quite a lot, is that the requirement to preserve non-residential floor area is really intended to preserve these large major clusters of office and production space, and will only apply to significantly large buildings, as exemplified in the top photo here. Smaller lofts that may be less attractive as office space or more conducive to conversions are not subject to this limitation. We also appreciate the comments we heard in previous meetings that, and as part of scoping, that it is important to streamline the requirements to make sure rigidity and overly complicated processes don't stand in the way of appropriate adaptive reuse of buildings. We'll take those into consideration as the neighborhood plan develops. Going hand in hand with the mixed-use zoning are strategies to address the various public realm issues. We see them as an integral part of the neighborhood plan. Next slide, please. So our starting points are really issues and ideas that emerged out of Envision SoHo NoHo. So I listed them here on the slide. I think the key message we heard from you is that something needs to be done in order to help different uses, businesses, and residents exist in at least relative harmony. Among them, on top of our minds, and they are reiterated in many scoping comments, are, first and foremost, the retail loading and unloading, and then also solid waste management. To continue this conversation, I'm glad to have my colleagues from the right agencies on the panel tonight to speak more knowledgeably than me on programs and strategies that DOT and sanitation have at their disposal. For issues and questions that go beyond city planning, DOT and sanitation's purview, we'll take down and follow up as needed after tonight. With that, I'll turn it over to Jennifer from DOT.
Thank you, Sylvia, and good evening, everyone. My name is Jennifer Sandainez, and I am the Manhattan Deputy Borough Commissioner at the New York City Department of Transportation. I'm also joined by my colleague, Kimberly Rancourt, Director of Special Projects for the Manhattan Borough Commissioner's Office tonight. I'd like to run through a couple of DOT programs and initiatives that may help address some of the quality of life concerns raised over the course of the neighborhood plan discussions. And with that, next slide, please. First is DOT's off-hour deliveries, or OHD program, run through our freight mobility team in the Transportation Planning and Management Division. DOT's OHD program aims to help reduce congestion on city streets by providing technical support to businesses interested in shifting their delivery times from peak windows to off-peak windows of 7 p.m. to 6 a.m. We have just over 900 participating businesses in our OHD program citywide, and this year we're continuing our expansion efforts to grow the program with a focus on the highest daytime congested areas in downtown Brooklyn, downtown Jamaica and Flushing in Queens, and here in Manhattan south of 59th Street. Next slide. By shifting deliveries to overnight hours, both the transporter and receiver of the goods sees multiple benefits, including more predictable delivery windows, reduced transit time and fuel costs, and overall more efficient deliveries. I do want to stress and highlight that in addition to these business benefits, there are several community benefits to having fewer trucks on the road during the busiest times of day. OHD can help to reduce the number of double parking incidents and traffic congestion in and around the neighborhood, and can help to reduce emissions as trucks are no longer idling while sitting in traffic. OHD can also help to reduce overall truck trips during the peak periods of pedestrian and cyclist activity, leading to a safer and more pleasant experience for everyone using the street. Next slide, please. DOT is also very sensitive to shifting and increasing any associated noise pollution from overnight deliveries, particularly here in mixed-use residential neighborhoods. And preserving that quality of life is a primary concern for both DOT and our OHD partners. We proactively include a noise mitigation guide and strategies as part of our onboarding materials to OHD participants, and that includes a list of low noise equipment and best practices for drivers and delivery personnel. Our team works to educate freight operators and retailers on realizing the benefits, such as good community relations and being an overall good neighbor, of adopting noise control products and utilizing equipment for making quiet deliveries. And of note, we have recently updated 311 to funnel calls about late night delivery noise directly to our DOT Freight Mobility Hotline, allowing our team to track these calls. So whenever a complaint comes in, we conduct an initial investigation to confirm if noise is the problem. And should that be the case, we coordinate with our sister agency, the Department of Environmental Protection, DEP, on solutions, and also work directly with the relevant OHD partner to address those complaints. Next slide. In addition to our OHD program, and as part of our efforts to reduce double parking and improve safety and mobility on our streets, DOT started to evaluate the effectiveness of neighborhood loading zones, or NLZs. In summer of 2019, we had pilot locations across the Upper West Side and Chelsea neighborhoods. We provided dedicated curb space for short-term loading activities by implementing new signage and converting parking spaces into no parking regulations during the daytime and evening hours, Monday through Friday. These new time of day no parking spaces allow curb access for package deliveries by commercial vehicles, taxi and car service pickup and drop off, and active loading and unloading of personal vehicles. Residents are then able to park in these spaces overnight and over the weekend. And throughout the one-year pilot, we found that NLZs helped to reduce double parking during daytime hours on residential blocks, leading to a safer environment for all street users. NLZs can also help to reduce conflicts between trucks and cyclists, improve bus travel times, and better serve all activities that occur on our city streets. And over the course of the last year, throughout the pandemic, many of us, including myself, have relied on the delivery of groceries and goods directly to our homes, further underscoring the importance and utility of short-term loading space at the curb. Last December, we made these sign changes permanent and installed additional neighborhood loading zones in our pilot neighborhoods. And following the success of that pilot, the agency is now evaluating ways to administer the NLZ program beyond our initial zones. And we look forward to sharing more information with the community stakeholders as that plan gets further developed. With that, I'm happy to wrap up the DOT slides and answer any questions about our programs during Q&A. And now I'd like to hand it off to my colleague at the Department of Sanitation, Greg Anderson.
Thanks, Jennifer. I'm Greg Anderson, Assistant Commissioner for Policy and External Affairs at the New York City Department of Sanitation. And at DSNY, our mission is to keep New York City healthy, safe, and clean. We deal with a range of issues related to street and sidewalk cleanliness, trash, recycling collection, and obviously over the last few months, snow removal. And these issues are very important for the quality of life in every neighborhood in New York City, particularly in neighborhoods as dynamic as SoHo and NoHo. DSNY works closely with community groups, neighborhood residents, bids, and other stakeholders to improve and protect the quality of life. And while the COVID-19 pandemic and resulting budget crisis have limited the resources that we have to provide these services directly, we remain very committed to using our limited resources as productively and effectively as possible to benefit all neighborhood residents. And today I want to talk about two exciting new initiatives that we have that have the opportunity to transform and improve the way that we use our public spaces. Next slide. So the first is Clean Curbs, and this is a pilot actually with DOT and Sanitation, and it comes out of a request for expressions of interest that we put out a few years ago about how to better manage trash that currently is placed out for collection on our sidewalks. And basically what this would allow is for private entities to set out containers for commercial waste on either the street in the parking lane, or if there's enough room on the sidewalk. And there are a number of benefits. You can see here on the right an illustration of what one potential proposal would look like. These can reduce rodents, they're sealed containers, reduce odors, and reduce some quality of life concerns. By moving bags of trash off the sidewalk, they can improve pedestrian flow and mobility, and they can also make it more efficient to collect waste to begin with. Next slide. So how does Clean Curbs work? Entities, whether it's bids or individual retailers, would apply to Sanitation to install a container on the street or sidewalk. The applications require the support of the property owner or owners that they're in front of. DSNY and DOT will review the application. We've come up with an expedited review process that's a lot more straightforward than typical reviews for this pilot period. And if approved, the entity notifies the community board of the installation. There's a maintenance agreement to make sure that everything's cared for properly, that they're cleaning around the container, and that there aren't any rodent or odor issues that come up. And there's obviously an insurance requirement as well. Next slide. So this just shows on the right a few examples of similar installations in Europe. These are very common there. It's a much more efficient and effective way to set out waste and collect waste. And then on the left, another example from the request for expressions of interest that we put out of a design proposed here in New York by a team of architects. And so with that, I'll hand it off to my colleague, Justin Bland, to talk about our other initiative.
Hi, everybody. I'm very happy to be here speaking to a group of people passionate about quality of life, because commercial waste zones is definitely a quality of life project. What it is DSNY's reform of the inefficient and dangerous private carting industry. And we're creating a safe and efficient collection system that provides high quality, low cost service while advancing the city's zero waste goals. And what is commercial waste zone? So in a nutshell, I'll have you look at the two maps that are on the right. These are commercial waste routes. It's before and after. The red squiggly line is one existing commercial waste route. That is a single truck. There are about 700 of these trucks that run every single night collecting waste from commercial establishments throughout the city. What commercial waste zones is doing is reining in the overlapping and chaotic nature of these operations, putting some boundaries on how many companies can do the same operations in one single area, and making the routes much shorter by limiting where they can go. So a hypothetical after route is portrayed in green. This one route goes serving the same number of customers, collecting the same amount of waste, but it's 75% shorter. So when we replicate that 700 times every single night, this program will take 18 million miles of heavy duty truck traffic off of New York City streets every single year. That's eliminating more than half of the current carting industry traffic off of New York City streets. So this is a direct quality of life improvement in every single neighborhood in New York City, bringing safer streets, quieter nights, and cleaner streets. So this has been in the planning process for several years. With the enactment of Local Law 199 in November 2019, we're moving from planning to implementation. So this is a local law and we are now in implementation mode. If you can move to the next slide, please. So what's the problem? The commercial waste routes are very long. They're regularly over 100 miles long. Why are they so long? It's because their customers are spaced very far apart. So you have to drive very far to get to your customers to fill up your truck. Why are the stops very far apart? It's because many different companies are operating in the same area. So if you look at the map on the right, that's a map of how many different carting companies operate within each community district in New York City. If you look at Manhattan Community Board 2, you'll see that in this small geographic area, just about 1 square mile, there are 49 different carting companies with 49 different fleets of trucks, all driving to your neighborhood just to do essentially the same service of drive there, pick up trash, put it in the back, and drive on. And that's not to mention all of the trucks that are driving through the neighborhood to get from, say, downtown to midtown. So for residents, this is a lot of excess noise, pollution, truck traffic, and with truck traffic, safety risks. These are heavy trucks and their job is to collect things and get heavier. So any traffic incidents can be very serious and devastating. For the workers on these trucks, these are long, dangerous routes. If you're driving all over the city, this is a very tough job. We need to give them the tools to do this safer and without labor violations. For customers, there's currently very little price transparency. A lot of, it's not clear why you're getting charged, what you're getting charged. And there's very little confidence in recycling. That if you do follow the regulations that DSNY sets on recycling, there's very little confidence that the carter is actually picking up those materials properly and processing them properly. And then for the carters themselves, they don't want to operate in this chaotic way. It's sort of a race to the bottom that they're stuck in. You always have to go the extra mile to pick up a new customer, or your competitor will. That leads to incentives for cutting corners on very important things like safety, recycling, clean infrastructure, and worker protections. For the city, we have, before commercial waste zones, an outdated regulatory scheme. So it was very hard for us to enforce on anything other than integrity issues. Next slide, please. So what is our solution? Is creating a system of 20 zones. We have established these zones, and this is a map of the established 20 zones. So I'll have you look at the purple zone, Manhattan Southwest. So this is comprised entirely of Manhattan Community District 2. And essentially trucks that are picking up commercial waste in Manhattan Southwest, they will have very tight, efficient routes within Manhattan Southwest and will not be driving into other zones. And very importantly, all of the trucks collecting in other zones will not be coming in to the Manhattan Southwest zone. So we'll have an RFP process to select 3 carters to collect waste in each zone. In addition to that, we'll have 5 contracts available for providing containerized waste citywide. So not limited to just geographic areas, but this is for high volume producers who fill up a roll-off container where essentially that is the route. So for those customers, a potential of 5 additional vendors. For a carter to win a zone contract, they have to meet high qualifications related to low pricing, strong customer service plans, modern infrastructure, and strong sustainability and safety plans. And like today, a customer will be able to shop around and select the carter that meets its needs, whatever they are. If you care about low pricing, you can shop around based on pricing. If you want a specific time window and you know one carter that can offer that very exact window and always meets it, you can shop around that way. The difference is there are now new customer service minimum standards that are set in city rules and written into city contracts that are much more enforceable. But also like today, the ultimate enforcement tool is if you're not happy as a customer, you can switch carters and you can fire your carters. Next slide, please. So commercial waste zones will bring benefits to all stakeholders. And Manhattan Community Board 2, you'll go from a existing 49 overlapping carting operations down to just 3. And on top of that, this will be eliminating all of the pass-through traffic from downtown to midtown collection routes. So for residents, you're getting safer streets, cleaner air, and much, much quieter nights. For customers, you'll have low transparent pricing, improved recycling, confidence that it's actually working appropriately, stronger service accountability, and greater quality of life on retail corridors, better places to do business. For carters, they're getting out of the race to the bottom dynamics, and they're really for the first time having the ability to operate efficiently and think long-term and make big, bold investments. And for workers, these are shorter, safer routes. They will have increased training, increased tools. So these will be much better jobs for the men and women on the trucks handling the waste in your neighborhood. So where are we in this? We are currently in the RFP process. Local Law 199 came out at the end of 2019. After that, we worked to develop the RFP. Due to some disruptions in this industry, as with just about every industry from the COVID-19 pandemic, it is delaying the process somewhat. So we expect the RFP to continue throughout the current calendar year. And that includes receiving proposals, evaluating them, negotiating contracts, and entering into contracts. So for customers, this means that a phased 2-year customer transition process where the 100,000 commercial carting contracts slowly and carefully switch into this new system that will begin halfway through 2022. And for more information, I'd just like to plug our website, nyc.gov/commercial waste, for our implementation plan, the local law, environmental review, procurement documents, ongoing rulemakings. There's a lot of resources there if you're interested. And we'll be happy to address any questions at the Q&A. And next slide, please. And that brings us to a 5-minute break before we get into the Q&A. So thank you very much, everybody.
Hi, everyone. Welcome back. My name is Nabila Malik, and I'm a planner working on the SoHo NoHo team at City Planning. We'll go ahead and begin the Q&A session. Please be aware that all participants will remain muted unless called on. And just so everyone is aware, we will post all questions from this session on our website following the event, and you can always check our FAQ at nyc.gov/SoHo NoHo plan, which we update periodically with more answers. Just to begin, I know we get this question a lot, so I just want to let everyone know that we currently have 122 attendees. Next slide, please. Just a reminder that if you speak Mandarin or Cantonese, we can help translate your question live. Next slide. So the way it will work is that we'll alternate between written questions we're receiving through the Zoom Q&A feature and from participants raising their hand and asking questions live. I will call out speaker names in advance, 4 at a time, so you get a sense of the order, but I'll alternate between 2 raised hands and 2 written questions. As Sylvia noted earlier, we're focusing on today's theme during the Q&A session, but we really appreciate all of your questions and we'll answer as many as we can tonight, and then we'll be sure to relay any others after this event. Sylvia, along with our colleagues from DOT and Sanitation, Jennifer, Greg, and Justin, are on deck to respond. And again, our next event is scheduled for March 30th, and it will focus on arts and culture, so there will be more opportunities to ask specific questions. Next slide, please. Based on feedback from our previous sessions, we're working hard to mirror the benefits of in-person events during these virtual sessions. And to that end, when you're called on and given the ability to unmute, you will also have the option to turn your camera on. Please be aware that to enable this option, your Zoom screen will close out and pop back up again. So don't be alarmed. It can take up to a few seconds. The same thing will happen once you're done asking your question. We ask that everyone respect the 2-minute time limit when speaking so that we can get to as many people as possible. And if you're dialed in, you can press *9 to raise your hand. Next slide, please. So we want to ensure that this conversation is a pleasant experience for all. We've also enabled the chat function now so that you may interact with your neighbors and other attendees. If you do have a question though, please ask it in the Q&A box or raise your hand. The chat is for attendees only. Next slide, please. Okay, so now I'll start with 2 speakers and then 2 written questions. I'll be calling on individuals in the order in which they've raised their hands. So we'll first have Pete Davies, then David Lawrence, and then in the next round, we'll have Michael Levine and Louis Madigan. So Pete Davies, we're gonna go ahead and allow you to turn your camera on.
Okay, thank you. Couple of questions. It seems that what you're preparing us for is to mitigate for the changes in retail that are proposed, the addition of unknown number of additional retail square feet, since use group 10 seems to be on the list of things that you want to change for the neighborhood. Could you tell us more about any limitations of use group 10? Could you tell us about the office retention? Sylvia mentioned that that would be limited to certain buildings. Could you specify the size and how that is determined? Is DOT aware of the off-hours delivery study that was done for Uniqlo a number of years ago that showed impactful noise from them? Nighttime deliveries along Broadway and other streets are a huge problem in this neighborhood. So instituting that program here in a very mixed use area is questionable. The addition in the streets 24/7 of bins for commercial pickup, that is 24/7. We get those things in the street and on the sidewalk to deal with trash that's out there for a few hours. That doesn't seem to make sense. And there are a lot of other questions that we all have. I really question the push for the enlargement of retail in the neighborhood with no real study for how that will impact the neighborhood. Thank you.
Great, thank you, Pete. Sylvia, do you want to start, and then we'll pass it on to Jennifer and Greg?
Yeah, sure. Thanks, Pete. I want to thank you for your questions. Very thoughtful, and I do appreciate your unasked question about the JLWQA and mechanism. We will, talk about arts and culture and JLWQA some more next session. So I'll start with your large retail question. I think aside from the quality of life challenges, as I know that you experience frequently, I think the idea of allowing large retail really reflects what is already here in SoHo, NoHo, and recognizes the contribution of retail to our city. I think I noted in the presentation, among other things, SoHo, NoHo, especially SoHo, our successful retail destinations provide jobs, contribute to a great deal to our city's economy. So, we've heard arguments that larger stores not only employ a large workforce, but also offer career path and upward mobility. This is, these are all important to be considered as part of the neighborhood plan. I do think that a lot of the concerns around large retail is really about the operational side of retail establishments. And that's why we're having these conversations today. And hopefully those issues can be more effectively addressed through these means beyond zoning that will, mitigate noise, streamline deliveries. And I'll let, DOT and sanitation speak more to those other aspects of the impacts of large retail. I think your second question that I should address is about office retention. One thing to clarify is that as I mentioned in the presentation, the intent of kind of introducing a requirement to require certain larger, clusters of certain larger lofts to be, kind of preserved as important, office and production space is to ensure that, as we introduce residential use and allow other types of uses, kind of the mixed use character is strengthened and maintained. We are doing analyses in terms of, where these existing office and production space are clustered to figure out the right threshold to apply that requirement. Our primary focus are really kind of examples shown on the photo on the slide that I was pointing to, these, the largest of the lofts along the Broadway corridor up and down SoHo and NoHo. Those are our priority, but appreciate your question. We are doing analyses and we'll be able to speak more to that as the proposal gets further developed. And with that, I think I can hand it over to Jennifer to address the OHD question.
Great. Thanks, Sylvia, and thanks, Pete, for your question. Just to speak a little bit more to how DOT can assist businesses in making the shift to off-hour deliveries. We work closely to evaluate any potential curbside access and changing of parking regulations where applicable and when feasible. And we conduct outreach to the businesses and organizations, including trade groups and neighborhood improvement organizations, as well as the interested business in shifting that delivery hour. But I did mention that we provide guidance on noise mitigation, which I think is hitting home to where your question was going. And we also provide information on other related programs to improve that delivery efficiency. I do hear your point about, that shifting of the noise to overnight, especially for the residences in the neighborhood. I did want to try to directly answer your question about, was it enforcement mechanisms? And sorry, are you able to further elaborate and clarify? There were a lot of questions as part of your comment. Or should I look to Nabila and Sylvia for that?
Sorry, yeah, so Pete isn't able to come back on. Mm-hmm. Sylvia, do you have further notes?
Sorry, what was your question, Jennifer?
I just want to be able to explicitly address Pete's question. I was speaking a little bit more in general terms about, DOT's technical guidance that we provide to businesses for off-hour delivery. And I'm happy to speak a little bit more about the noise mitigation efforts that we do, but I just want to ensure that is hitting the question on the mark.
Yeah, I do think that, I don't want to speak for him, but I do think that his question represents a lot of concerns, kind of for residents along the Broadway corridor, particularly around noise in late night hours, if, loading and unloading were to be prioritized during those hours.
Absolutely. And I know I had mentioned the use of quiet delivery practices, including low noise equipment. There is a list of this type of equipment that we provide to all of our OHD participants. And I mentioned that any 311 complaints get filtered now directly to the DOT Freight Mobility Team for us to track and to further investigate. If there are any particular noise complaints at a specific address, we look into that, and then we work with our colleagues at DEP to further investigate solutions and also work directly with our partners. We have frequent check-ins with each of our participating businesses to help address any concerns that are coming up throughout their overnight deliveries.
And Jennifer, just to add, I think part of the specific question was about the Uniqlo study. So perhaps we can check in with our freight mobility team on that and follow up.
Absolutely. Thanks, Kimberly.
And then just to very quickly address the part of the question on clean curbs, the reason that it's a pilot is we want to really test whether this type of collection works, where it works best, and then come out with formal rules later on. Right now, the pilot, the duration of the agreements that we're signing is just 1 year. So definitely, really want feedback from community members about proposed locations and really learn from that going forward.
Great, thanks all. So next we'll have David Lawrence. David, just be aware your screen will will close out and pop back up again.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, great. I'll be brief. I have two main questions. The first one is I'm glad that the Department of Transportation and Department of Sanitation are both trying to work through some creative solutions to some of the problems we have. I'm very heartened by that, but I'm very disappointed that when on a meeting that's devoted to quality of life, we don't have the Parks Department or the Department of Education represented here to present how they are going to improve the quality of life in SoHo, which has neither to any degree. That's my first question. Why are they not here? And what, are they doing anything at all? Is there any plan to improve the situation in both of those areas? The second question that I have is regarding primarily the Department of Transportation. You know, the elephant in the room here is the fact that SoHo is a transit point for the Holland Tunnel, the Manhattan, and the Williamsburg Bridge. And it frequently is filled with gridlock. And Broadway, Broome Street, and Canal Street are all affected. And then all the small theater streets are also affected. I think an integral part to this whole study should be how we're going to minimize traffic, not only on those major streets, but all the side streets. And I don't see any attention to that problem at all. And I think that's a major problem. When you're talking about doubling the population of SoHo by going from 7,000 or 8,000 people to approximately 16 or 18,000 with all this new housing that's proposed, how are you going to accommodate that when there's gridlock everywhere from 3 to 7 o'clock, 5 or 6 nights a week? Thanks for your time.
Thank you, David. Sylvia, do you want to go ahead and start?
Sure, I'll take the first one. Thank you, David, for your question and for continuing to be engaged. I think it's your question about, you know, schools and open space is a really good one, and it's something that we continue to work on. I think, you know, tonight we're fortunate to have DOT and DSNY, but I think you raise a good point of, you know, collaboration with agencies beyond these two. I would say that the SoHo NoHo neighborhood plan creates the space for these interagency collaboration and the community to work together to identify where the needs are and work on strategies that will support the growth that you mentioned, and also making sure that there is also an improvement in quality of life. I'll mention that as part of the environmental review process for the plan, which is progressing in parallel with these, you know, public sessions, the potential for impacts on childcare and school seats, open space, and other community resources will be analyzed, and then which will help identify needs where there is an adverse impact. Mitigation measures will be explored. So that is, you know, kind of a long answer to say that, you know, we continue to work on that, and totally agree that other agencies need to be brought in. And with that, I think I should turn it over to Jennifer on the traffic question.
Hi, and thanks for your question. You know, I do want to reiterate some of the points that I made about our OHD and neighborhood loading zone initiatives. You know, shifting over to overnight deliveries and off-peak hours will help to reduce that congestion during peak times during the day, as well as, you know, the looking at the possibility of creating these neighborhood loading zones on the residential and mixed-use streets to allow for short-term loading activities, to kind of open up that space and to further reduce any double parking and congestion that's happening in and around and through the district. I do want to also make mention, I know Sylvia had addressed your question about including additional agencies into this discussion, but DOT is also the overseer of the public realm, and so that's public streets and sidewalks. And I know that there was a request for additional open space in this area. I do want to just make a point that we do have our Open Streets program, which DOT is currently administering, in which we started last May during the pandemic to allow for greater social distancing throughout COVID-19. And in his State of the City last month, Mayor de Blasio announced that the Open Street Initiative will become permanent. And as we did with the recovery program, DOT is going to look to focus on locations where we have local partner management and support to ensure that these corridors are maintained and accessible. And I think that's a key word is accessible, because there is already existing congestion issues and concerns throughout the district. So while we're opening up streets to pedestrians and cyclists, we also don't want to further create congestion for vehicles. So that is something that DOT needs to take into account when looking for corridors to expand our Open Streets program.
Great, thank you. All right, so I'm going to alternate now to the written questions we've received. So the first one is, are these 3 meetings tied to and a continuation of the draft scope of work? Where does DCP stand on the draft scope of work? What's the time frame for the final scope of work?
Thanks, Nabila. And thanks for the question. So I think we're trying to what we're trying to illustrate in on that timeline slide is that the input from these public sessions will inform the development of the zoning proposal and taking things forward from the draft scope of work. So I think you're right that these are connected to the draft scope of work. Timing wise, we are targeting the second quarter for refining the scope of work and issuing the draft environmental impact statement. Obviously, nobody has a crystal ball, but that's what we're aspiring to. Thank you.
Thank you, Sylvia. The next question is, how does freight delivery 7 p.m. to 6 a.m. ameliorate noise for residential tenants living in the same buildings? What is the enforcement and fine mechanism for quiet delivery mechanisms? Jennifer?
So right now, the DOT OHD program, works to provide technical support and guidance to businesses that are interested in shifting their deliveries to overnight. So there's no specific fines or enforcement that are associated with participating businesses using these low noise equipment. However, there is, a big uptick on all of our partners. They do see the benefit in being a good neighbor. And should there be any particular locations where we may hear complaints, DOT is happy to help address those with our partners at DEP, as well as our specific OHD participant to ensure that residents are able to have that quiet overnight time.
Great, thank you, Jennifer. All right, so we'll go back to speakers raising their hands. So we'll start with Michael Levine, then Louis Madigan, then Mark Dykas, and then Samir Lavinkia. So starting with Michael Levine, just to let you know, Michael, your screen will close out and pop back up to allow you to turn your camera on.
Hello, and thank you for giving me the opportunity to speak, and thank you for your excellent presentation. My question, I believe, is mostly addressed to Sylvia regarding the specifics of the zoning text change as it relates to commercial uses. At the present time, we have a system of special permits and other approvals required for certain large-scale retail uses and for eating and drinking establishments. Do I understand the proposal as I have heard it? And I think we all do understand the importance of commercial uses to the city of New York, to SoHo, and to recovery from the pandemic. But do I understand that all commercial uses will be allowed as of right, and there will no longer be special permits or other city planning commission actions regarding large-scale retail uses, eating and drinking establishments, and the other kinds of noise and traffic generation commercial uses in the neighborhood? The advantage of having had special permits up until now is that it gives the community an opportunity to meet with potential users of the space, to figure out how the space will be used, and to negotiate ways of mitigating. And I do appreciate the Department of Transportation proposals for loading and unloading, but it gives the community the opportunity to discuss with potential users or the loading hours and times and noise mitigation, hours of operation, other effects on the street and on the neighborhood. So again, are all commercial uses as of right with no special permit or review procedures, or will there still be any limitations on commercial uses in SoHo and NoHo? And thank you again for a wonderful presentation.
Thank you, Michael. Thanks for your question. Again, very thoughtful and very, specific. So two things to clarify. One is I think the draft scope of work and the proposal as in its current form are kind of the starting point of the final zoning proposal. I think we're starting from a point where a wider range of commercial uses, including those uses you mentioned, would be allowed as of right. I do think in terms of the special permits process and the usefulness of those, I think the presentation addresses that somewhat, but here I'll kind of elaborate a little bit more on a couple of fronts. First, it is really about what special permits and variances are designed to do and whether it is reasonable to require a special permit for a certain use, say a retail store in SoHo and NoHo. If retail fits into how ground floors are typically used and character of the neighborhood, provides financial stability for the building owner and is typically what people want to have in their ground floor spaces. And if it's also a use that is typically allowed as of right in other similarly centrally located, accessible mixed-use neighborhoods, then requiring somebody to have to go through a complicated, lengthy, and costly process is not reasonable in SoHo NoHo. If we're talking about, putting retail in an exclusively residential neighborhood where none or very little retail exists, that is a very different story. And that's when special permits and variances are most useful and productive. And second, I think it's about, I totally understand the concerns around large retail in particular, and, kind of certain impacts of eating and drinking. But in terms of the requirement of going through individual land use review process is about where the burden falls. While special permits and variances are available to be sought by anyone, theoretically, these are complex, time-consuming, and expensive processes that disproportionately hinder small businesses and individual property owners who may not have the resources to pursue these avenues. We actually hear the sentiment echoed quite a lot. I think third, zooming out a little bit, going back to what we discussed in the presentation, and I think you acknowledge in your question that creating the necessary zoning flexibility to support jobs and recovery and people's livelihood is important. Making sure that zoning creates room for them at the appropriate locations with thoughtful but not overly punitive limits is important. Should businesses, especially large retailers, and eating and drinking places with, entertainment components be good neighbors and operate in ways that are more respectful of their residential neighbors? Absolutely. And that's why we're having these conversations. I do want to kind of also address your point about how special permits can be useful in, helping the community, creating a forum for the community to negotiate on these quality of life issues. I want to note that individual land use applications cannot bring to the table all the necessary stakeholders, other than the applicant seeking the specific approval to help collectively resolve issues such as retail deliveries along the entire stretch of a street, or implement consistent best practices on limiting noise, centralized trash collection, et cetera, and these quality of life issues. For those who don't, come to us or to the community to pursue that land use application, there's really no way to kind of make them better neighbors. So SoHo NoHo neighborhood plan, as part of the rezoning, we're really trying to provide the platform to help address these quality of life challenges in a more holistic way. Again, thank you for your question.
Great, thanks, Sylvia. So next up is Louis Madigan. And just a reminder, your screen will close out and pop back up again.
Hi, and thank you for the opportunity to speak at this hearing. I'm Lou Madigan from Madigan Development. We recently completed a development, 100-unit rental building, LEED Silver, 30% affordable, in the adjacent neighborhood of Hudson Square. And I've been the longtime board member of a community health center just adjacent to SoHo that provides primary care to over 6,000 people, anyone who comes in the door, without regards to legal status or ability to pay or anything else. So I'm personally and professionally invested in the community, and just wanted to participate and say that I'm in support of the rezoning. I think that, as Jane Jacobs taught us a long time ago, part of a prosperous community is the flexibility for it to evolve organically. And the historic zoning, which provides very ample space for typewriter repair shops and other light manufacturing, which is really no longer part of our local economy, provides a burdensome, can cost tens of thousands of dollars in legal fees to get a special permit to open a small restaurant. So I think the rezoning is a wonderful, transition that will help the city prosper as we get out of COVID. Lastly, I just wanted to bring up that the getting away from carbon fuels will mean that the heating systems can no longer be in basements. So when we build new buildings and they're 600% efficient, we end up losing floor area throughout the building for these new mechanical systems that are much better for the environment. It means you end up getting about 10 to 15% less out of a building, which we're hoping you will consider when considering the bulk regulations for the neighborhood. Thank you.
Great, thank you, Louis. All right, so we will go ahead and switch to 2 more written questions. So the first one is, can you please include sidewalk repair in discussion of congestion? For people with disabilities and seniors, this is a priority. Jennifer, do you want to take that?
Sure, thanks, Nabila, and thank you for that question. DOT certainly understands the importance for pedestrians to have safe passageway on the sidewalk, and we certainly can include that as part of our discussions in our evaluation. I do want to say that if there are any particular addresses or locations where there are egregious sidewalk issues, of course, property owners are responsible to repair the sidewalk in front of their address. And so we can send out our SIM team to take a look, issue violations, and follow up on that repair. And so let us know, and we will certainly include this as part of our discussions.
Thank you, Jennifer. The next question is, what can be done with private sanitation trucks that are outdated and extremely loud? They are responsible for awaking residents in our neighborhoods all night long as they travel. One can hear them coming from blocks away. Will they be made to update their fleet? Justin?
Yes, they will have to update their fleet. The commercial waste zones plan is very much a response to knowing that commercial waste vehicles are very loud and they have a direct impact on quality of life. And as all New York City residents know, fewer garbage trucks going down your street is a better thing. Commercial waste zones will eliminate more than half of the commercial waste vehicles going down your streets every single night. So starting from there, that is a huge benefit. You will have half the amount or fewer garbage trucks every single night. On top of that, we are in the midst of a procurement process where we're selecting vendors to service these zones. We're asking for many different plans, but one of them is what kinds of trucks are you using? And what are your plans to make investments? So we will know exactly how old all of these trucks are. And it's not an exaggeration. There are many very old trucks out there. There can be 30-year trucks that are still going down the street. So it is definitely something that we want to move forward with this RFP. Carters that propose modern fleets will have a leg up and will stand a better chance of winning an award. On top of that, we are looking at how can you reduce emissions in your fleet. That ties to this question because the next frontier for garbage trucks are electric garbage trucks. Those will be very, very quiet. Just think of a hybrid, but the size of a garbage truck. So when we get to that point, I think we are a few years away from that being expanded industry-wide, but companies that can propose to electrify their fleet, that is something we want to see. And they stand a better chance of winning a commercial waste zone award. And that's better for the air in the neighborhood and it's better for the noise levels.
Great, thanks, Justin. All right, so moving on to some speakers. Next, we'll have Mark Dykas, then Samir Lavinkia, then Janine Kiley, and then Katie Rice. So we'll start with Mark Dykas.
Unmute. Okay. Hi, good evening. Hi, Nabila. Good evening, Sylvia and colleagues from DSNY and DOT. My name is Mark Dykas. I'm the Executive Director of the SoHo Broadway Initiative. We're the not-for-profit that manages the neighborhood-focused business improvement district on Broadway from Houston to Canal. At the same time, city planning is working on its plan to fix SoHo's mixed-use zoning. The initiative is very excited that the city has also initiated efforts to address quality of life issues identified in the Envision SoHo NoHo report, including sidewalk and roadway congestion, lack of open and green space, and impacts of garbage and commercial deliveries on this very important mixed-use neighborhood. In a time when people can live and work anywhere, it has never been more important to welcome residents, shoppers, visitors, and workers back into a neighborhood or the one they're currently living in, into a neighborhood that's clean, spacious, and comfortable. In an effort to work on these solutions to these issues, the initiative has launched a public realm visioning plan effort with a task force that includes local residential and business stakeholders, as well as Manhattan Borough President Gail Brewer, Councilmember Chen, and representatives from DOT and Community Board 2. We look forward to working with our partners from the city, local stakeholders, elected officials, and the community board to implement programs that our planning process determines to be a good fit for SoHo in addressing these long-standing public realm and quality of life issues. Really excited to learn more about the Clean Curbs program, the zone collection efforts, the new ways to manage the curb. I think these are all really important solutions to consider. In regard to the off-hour delivery program that was described, we frequently get complaints about noisy deliveries that wake residents up in the middle of the night. This is a program that I know many residents have concerns about and are likely to oppose. This question may have been asked before, but just any information that you can share on the enforceability of against bad actors would be helpful. Like how will DOT hold bad actors accountable? Will they be able to stop deliveries from happening if they continue to interfere with people's quiet night? Thank you.
Jennifer, do you want to start with a question?
Sure. Thanks, Nabila, and thank you, Mark, for your questions. Good to see you. We do look forward to hearing more about the proposal and working together as we move forward to just enhance the public realm here in the district. Speaking to the enforcement of the off-hour deliveries program and ways that we can ensure that, all of our participating businesses are doing quiet deliveries and are working to, keep up the quality of life around residences. We can continue, as I mentioned earlier, to encourage these businesses to, transition over to low noise equipment. While we don't have, a fine or enforcement type of mechanism in place, DOT does take into consideration very significantly all of these quality of life concerns, because we do want our OHD program to be successful and work in terms of offering a more livable city and less congested streets during the daytime. I will make a note again of our updating of the 311 system for folks to directly plug in complaints about any noise that is associated with overnight deliveries. Again, those complaints are now being directed to the DOT Freight Mobility Team, so we can help to investigate and address any of these continuous bad actors in certain locations. And for folks that are looking to submit a complaint about any overnight delivery noise, I do recommend, plugging in some of the basic information, and that could just be the name or address of the business receiving that delivery. We're looking for information about a truck's location or a delivery company's name or description of a logo or other identifying marks on the truck to help us further investigate and get down to the bottom of that problem.
Great, thanks, Jennifer. All right, next we'll have Samir Lavinkia, and just a reminder, your screen may close out and pop back up again.
All righty, did that work? Can you hear me?
Yes.
Perfect. Okay, as a bunch of people have mentioned, this plan is going to add a significant number of new residents to the neighborhood, which I think is great. Maybe I'll be one of them if I'm lucky. And one thing that I think is important when talking about the public realm and quality of life is the current infrastructure for people who walk and bike in the neighborhood. So like I walk on Prince Street all the time. That bike lane is consistently blocked. It's not great. So I guess my first question would be, like, in the area, what are some plans to improve that situation? And then if there's time. There's also a lot of activism happening around Canal Street and making that safer, because there have just been so many deaths, crashes, etc. on that street. And in 2009, I believe, the city did like a federally funded study that said, that had a few recommendations. One was to eliminate one lane of eastbound traffic between Broadway and West Broadway. One was to widen both the north and south sidewalks between Broadway and West Broadway as much as 7 feet, and a bunch of other suggestions that fall squarely within the planning area. Is the DOT or the city planning on addressing any of these issues during this time to make the area easier to walk around and safer? Or is that not part of this plan? Thank you.
Thank you, Samir. I think I can start and hand it off. Thank you for participating and supporting, introducing housing and adding residents to SoHo NoHo. I think you flagged good issues here in terms of bike lane and safety issues around Canal Street. I'm gonna hand it over to Jennifer to see if there are analysis or programs underway to address those.
Sure, thanks, Sylvia, and thanks, Samir, for your question. DOT is always looking for opportunities to add pedestrian space and add to our protected bicycle lane network throughout the city. And while we don't have any specific, plans just yet for this district, like I mentioned, we're always evaluating what's feasible and what's coming up next. So thank you for your support and your suggestion.
Thanks, Jennifer. So now I'll go to 2 written questions. So the first one is, there's so little space for people to walk on SoHo sidewalks, particularly along Broadway. Is there any plan to pedestrianize parts of SoHo, or at least remove a few lanes of parking and traffic to make the area more livable?
Happy to take that one as well. Thanks again for the question and the suggestion to add ped space, similar to the prior question. DOT is always looking for those opportunities. It's going to be a challenge here, right? There's going to be trade-offs about and a lot of evaluation that needs to take place, because it is already a congested area in terms of congested sidewalks and congested streets. So it's something that we are trying to look to evaluate, and always try to find opportunities when we can enhance the public space and add more pedestrian space when possible.
Great, thank you, Jennifer. The next question is, this carting proposal sounds very promising. For containers on sidewalks, who is paying for these? Also, in mixed-use buildings, such as Singer Building at 561 Broadway, why must residential owners upstairs pay for commercial carting services? Why isn't there residential pickup as in other neighborhoods? We certainly pay for it in taxes. Greg? Great.
Thank you for these questions. For the first one, and I should have mentioned this in my presentation, for the duration of the pilot, the containers will be paid for by either the commercial entity or the bid that's actually putting them out. We do, as I said, we do hope to evaluate the pilot further and potentially in the future come up with uniform standards, maybe a city approved or city recommended design, and potentially even have grant programs or financing programs in the future to be able to provide these directly to businesses, but unfortunately right now that's not really available. For the second question, this is a really tricky thing, and I think is very unique to SoHo and some other areas with a lot of converted spaces, Williamsburg and parts of North Brooklyn as well. And the challenge is, for sanitation, we are limited to collecting exclusively residential waste, and in spaces where you have commercial and residential uses mixed together, it's very challenging for us to distinguish what's which one's which. So, and often they can be, sort of commingled together. So it's something that definitely, we're happy to talk to community representatives about, to try to find a better solution, and maybe, through this process we can definitely do that. But it's something that's very difficult for us at the moment. And then I just want to address, I saw in the Q&A, there was one other question about clean curbs. So sorry to city planning for jumping ahead, but there was a question about whether or not that kind of strategy could be appropriate for residential trash collection. Absolutely, it's something that we've heard very loud and clear from a number of residents, particularly in other parts of Lower Manhattan, parts of Long Island City where I live, and it's something that we're definitely looking into. We're working with DOT to see if there are ways to set aside space for residential collection as well to reduce the impacts on sidewalk congestion and improve mobility. But we're a little bit sort of further back in that planning process, but definitely want to explore further and bring more ideas to the communities.
Great, thanks, Greg. So next we'll move on to speakers. First we'll have Janine Kiley, then Katie Rice, then Emily Hellstrom, and then Ken A. So we'll start with Janine Kiley. And just a reminder, your Zoom screen might close out and then pop back up so that you can unmute.
Hello.
Hello.
Hi, great. Thank you. While I appreciate the focus on city services such as sanitation, the city's plan proposes substantial zoning changes, and Sylvia Lee just clarified that will allow as of right retail and eating and drinking establishments without any special permit. So sort of following up on many previous questions, instead of residents relying on city programs, which might be optional, not uniformly enforced and subject to budget cuts, how can quality of life provisions be built into zoning provisions? And then on the open space area, are open streets defined as green streets, which are not open space under the secret technical manual? And what are realistic options for substantial and meaningful open space additions? If you look west, you'll see children and adults of all ages are substantially using J.J. Walker Park and Ballfield, particularly during the pandemic. And if you look east, you'll see how heavily Elizabeth Street Garden has been used. Thank you.
Thank you. Sylvia, do you want to start?
Yeah, sure. Thanks, Janine, for your question and being involved as always. I think that, appreciate your question about kind of the enforceability of or uniform implementation of these city programs. And I would invite my colleagues at DOT and Sanitation to speak more on like how to incentivize business operators to participate and also leverage local partners to encourage that. I think in terms of your suggestion to kind of incorporate quality of life measures as part of zoning, I would say that generally our view is that zoning is a very blunt tool to address these quality of life issues beyond, typical, kind of land uses and things that are squarely within the confines of zoning. So we do, our first step is really to think about operational aspects that can be improved. That being said, I do acknowledge that there are, concerns with regards to retail size, with regards to eating and drinking. One thing I do want to mention is that, large retail uses from a land use perspective, we do see them as appropriate in the area, given its mixed use character. Large floor plates and the supply of space. We think there is room for large and small businesses to coexist. What the neighborhood plan intends to do is really to have enough zoning flexibility to support this existing pattern, really the intermingle of small and large stores, and taking into account of these variety of floor plates and store sizes and built and streetscape differences between SoHo and NoHo, Broadway and off-Broadway, east-west versus north-south streets. Like I said, this neighborhood plan is still in progress. We're still working on it, and your input today and any flags that we hear will be considered as we continue to develop the neighborhood plan and refine the zoning proposal. And I think you have a second question about open space additions before I turn it over to Jennifer to see if there's additional, if she has additional responses. Is that, we know that there are 2 city-owned sites and that are DEP-owned that are in the process of being turned into passive open space under Parks jurisdiction. We think that those will be meaningful addition to SoHo NoHo.
And I'll add a little bit more about the DOT Open Streets program. I mentioned earlier that this was a recovery program that started last spring, to allow for greater social distancing during the pandemic. And we had a lot of local partners sign on to help us close down the street to through traffic. And so while an open street is in effect, so these are actually time of day closures, typically during the daytime, and certain days of the week, local access for deliveries, pickup and drop-offs, access for service, utility, and emergency vehicles is permitted, but no through traffic is allowed. So there is additional space here, an open space for pedestrians and cyclists to utilize that on the block. The DOT toolbox is always growing. And so while open streets might not work on every single avenue or side street, it is something that we can look to evaluate and see if there are any interested local partners. There are other ways that we can look to try to enhance the public realm as well. As I mentioned, our toolbox is always growing, and we're trying to come up with additional ways to further enhance it.
Great, thank you, Sylvia and Jennifer. So next will be Katie Rice. And Katie, again, your Zoom screen will close out and pop back up.
Hi, good evening. I'm Katie Rice. I'm a longtime resident and founding member of the Broadway SoHo Business Improvement District. Sylvia, first, thanks to you and your team for always providing an innovative programming and allowing the community to participate in these discussions. Thanks to the DOT and the Department of Sanitation for providing us with some innovative ideas. More efficient delivery and sanitation retrieval will absolutely raise the quality of life in our neighborhood. But I think what you're hearing from many of the participants, and sort of as always, especially in a mixed-use neighborhood like SoHo that has a high density of residential, retail tenants, and office use, one size really doesn't fit all. So I think my first question is, can these departments work with the various constituents in New York? Midtown, no residents, very few. SoHo, many residents and mixed uses, to something as diverse as Staten Island, which is almost suburban, and tailor your solutions to our different neighborhoods. My second question is really specifically addressed to the DOT and picking up on another comment, which is the very, very difficult long-term problem that we've had on Broadway, Broome, and Canal of traffic feeding into the Holland Tunnel, primarily Thursday, Friday, Saturday, Sunday, afternoon and evening. It is beyond belief quality of life issue, something we've tried to address for many, many years and have not been able to. So I ask you, when can we address this issue with you together? Thank you.
Great, thank you, Katie. Jennifer, do you want to begin?
Sure, thank you, Katie, for the question. Let me try to start off with the request to try to solve some of the congestion areas around the Holland Tunnel. We certainly agree that some work needs to be done here. And I know that there have been discussions and prior evaluations to determine what's feasible. I do want to just get the latest from my colleagues to see how we can continue to, come up with solutions with the stakeholders here and offer some solutions. So that's something that the DOT team will have to return back with some answers. And I think there was a question also about working with stakeholders to, ensure solutions that work for the local neighborhood here. For any DOT project that, I described earlier, and I'm guessing this is also the case for our other city projects and initiatives, it's not a one size fits all, easy solution and same solution for every street, every corridor. There are uniqueness and different types of contexts on each of the blocks. And so we certainly have to evaluate what solution makes the most sense for each corridor, each district, each neighborhood.
Great, thanks, Jennifer. And Greg, did you wanna respond for sanitation?
Yeah, hi. So thank you for the question. I think from the sanitation perspective, and I think, reading through some of the chat, I think, there's clearly a lot of good feedback. And, from sanitation's perspective, everything that we do is very focused on the communities we work in. Our districts are overlapping with community board districts. Sorry. Our district superintendents have very close relationships with the local communities that they serve. And so, we're always trying to tailor the work that we do, whether it's, straightforward services like litter basket collection and street cleaning, or, newer innovative things like commercial waste zones, or clean curbs to really, meet the needs of the neighborhoods. And so, we're committed to doing that here. And, we really want to keep working with the community and make sure that we're improving residents' lives going forward.
Great, thanks, Greg. I just want to give a reminder for anyone dialed in. If you'd like to raise your hand, you can dial *9. Thanks. And now I'll go to 2 written questions. So the first one is, commercial delivery is only part of the problem. If confined to nighttime hours, how will noise be regulated at night? During the day, there are many retail deliveries, most noticeably from Amazon and others. I'm not sure your proposal addresses that issue. Jennifer?
Thanks for that question. I think, it's very clear that there are concerns about overnight delivery noise and how that could affect the quality of life around the district. And that is something that DOT takes very seriously. I think I've already underscored points in how we encourage all of the participating businesses in our off-hour delivery program to utilize quiet equipment, be good neighbors, as well as the fact that 311 has been updated to funnels those overnight complaints directly to our freight mobility team to help address. I should also reiterate that we do work closely with all of the participating businesses and have frequent check-ins. So if there are any locations that continue to be bad actors, that's something that we can address during these check-in calls, and further encourage them to really shift to quiet equipment. And I also want to speak to the fact that I think there was mention of a lot of daytime deliveries, and I'm not sure if the point was that that's adding to congestion or double parking. Shifting to off-peak deliveries will help to address those larger traffic concerns. Granted, I think folks are going to be getting packages 24 hours a day, right? There's no set time when folks, will be able to get packages, but we do want to try to help address peak hours and try to kind of focus on how we can shift any type of deliveries to offer some alleviation for traffic congestion, for noise mitigation. I have to stress again, that is important to DOT, and we are going to continue to work on ensuring that bad actors, shape up quickly and the quality of life isn't disturbed for long periods of time here.
Great, thank you, Jennifer. The next question is the things that make SoHo a great neighborhood. Families, local jobs, creative people working together are getting driven out by luxury apartments, development, and corporate retail. We need affordable housing, local useful shops, and neighborhood services, i.e. schools, hospitals. Luxury shops and apartments block these necessary services from appearing. What is the city proposing to limit luxury stores and apartments to make space for resident services and ownership? Sylvia?
Sure, I can take that. And thank you for your question. I think the residential side of things was sort of touched upon in the prior session. I think I'll focus my answer on the retail piece. I think from our perspective, the onerous regulations add costs of doing businesses, making SoHo NoHo more expensive and inadvertently less accessible to a lot of the smaller businesses and the retail shops and local shops that you mentioned. If one has to go through a lengthy review process in order to locate a, say, small food store on the ground floor of SoHo NoHo area, I think that presents a huge barrier, both financially and in terms of time. So I think from our perspective, it is important to update the zoning to eliminate those onerous processes and lower the barriers of doing business in SoHo NoHo. When we get zoning out of the way, we may be, this is really hard to predict, but we think that when we get zoning out of the way, we may be more likely to see a wider range of retail stores, not just luxury stores that can afford to go through special permit processes or just afford to pay fines of being non-compliant, right? And also another point that I made previously is that it is hard to, I think in order to sustain a healthy kind of mix of retail with including stores that serve residents and local shops, I think to have more residents in SoHo NoHo would help on that front and generate stronger demands for these type of wider variety of businesses and services that are more local resident oriented. So thank you for your question.
Thank you, Sylvia. Next, we'll turn to our speakers. So we'll have Emily Hellstrom, then Ken A, and then we'll have Carter Booth, and then Zella Jones. So starting with Emily Hellstrom.
Hello? Can you see me? I don't.
Yes.
Or hear me? Okay, great. Hi, I'm Emily Hellstrom, and I am the Vice President of the SoHo Broadway Initiative, as well as being the co-op board president of my co-op, which is the largest one on the SoHo Broadway corridor. We actually are commercial landlords to the commercial properties in our building. And we have managed over the years to maintain and really keep long-term commercial property in our space by during difficult times such as we've just had, negotiating our leases, recognizing that our small businesses and our relationships with these businesses are very, very important, and we want to maintain them. And I just worry that there is this sort of very open-ended, floor to ceiling retail possibility that can bring even larger retail to the neighborhood, which brings very much corporate retail. A lot of times these types of deals are packaged into REITs, and they do not have the ability to lower rents, and thereby keeping retail frankly out of them. And so I get very worried that somebody was talking about, that we need change and we need organic change. And I do believe in organic change, and I do believe that there are compromises that can be made. But I feel very hesitant to believe that this is the way to go about it. And I'll continue to voice my concern for a massive increase in FAR in this neighborhood. It has the potential to drastically change the neighborhood. We should not be upzoning historic districts. There are other ways of getting better results. So thanks.
Great, thank you, Emily. Sylvia, do you want to go ahead and take that question?
Yeah, thank you, Emily, and thank you for being engaged all the way through. And, I hear you, and I, hear especially the worry about, these even larger retail stores. That being said, I think one, as I've, tried to address in answering earlier questions, is that there is room for a healthy, ecosystem of large and small stores, and we hope that this is a platform where concerns can continue to be voiced. We have the right, agencies and local partners, and such as SoHo Broadway Initiative and others in the neighborhood at the table to continue this conversation and then see, how, if and whether there are sufficient ways to address these concerns outside of zoning. But, I think this is a starting point, and we appreciate your involvement, and we'll continue this conversation.
Thank you, Sylvia. Next will be Ken A. And Ken, your Zoom screen may close out and pop back up again to be able to unmute.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you.
Yes, great. Okay. I'm Ken. My question is on today's topic of making mixed use work. And given that the zoning proposer from previous presentations suggested that there would be an option to either produce commercial space or residential space, how has the conversation evolved around incentivizing that residential space, particularly affordable residential space, doesn't get crowded out by commercial space. And so any update there would be appreciated. I'll yield the rest of my time.
Great, thank you.
Yes, Ken. I think that's a question that we sort of said that we are continuing to investigate. I think given the various planning goals here, we want to make sure that we're maximizing housing production where appropriate, while also supporting and reinforcing SoHo NoHo as a job center and mixed use district. So, we unfortunately we don't have much to report tonight. We're looking into it, and thanks for flagging the issue again. We want to make sure that we continue to analyze and make sure we're getting the balance right. Thanks.
Thanks, Sylvia. So given the time, we're at 8:30 currently. I'm going to continue with people who have raised their hands. I had announced Carter Booth and then Zella Jones. And then we'll take two more speakers after that, who will be Margaret Baisley and Erin Carr. So Carter, you're up and your screen will close out and pop back up.
Hi, everyone. Thanks for having us tonight. A couple of questions, or a number of questions. I have notes scrawled all over the place, so might be a little bit disjointed. Can you address more specifically the plans for public open space? We still have not heard this addressed. As Janine pointed out, the two spaces that you say are going to be allocated for green space are to service what exists already. This has, there's nothing here for the growth that you guys have suggested, particularly the large residential growth, and that's an important part of the city's planning for folks is having open green space. Number two, just want to comment on zoning being a blunt tool. It is, and this is why you're hearing so much pushback from local residents regarding increasing use group 6 and use group 10. Most of the use group 6 and use group 10 that we see today is legal. It exists there through approved special permits. They're not operating illegally. And I'd love to see the percentage breakouts of what is currently operating illegally from city planning. This is a reoccurring theme that we hear. Food stores are allowed in many of the existing vacant spaces in SoHo and NoHo. That's a use group 6 use. You can build them. Nobody's preventing any of the empty spaces from having food stores in them. As far as the onerous regulations, plenty of the spaces are vacant and have use group 6. Does the zoning need to be evolved? Yes. But increasing use group 6 and use group 10 in such a extreme manner as been proposed during a retail apocalypse doesn't make any sense. And we haven't continued the conversation on that as a community, as part of the group. And also just some of the tools, did DOT or sanitation actually look in SoHo and NoHo? The neighborhood loaning zone isn't applicable here. There is no alternate side of the street parking. There is truck parking during the day that exists throughout the district. That's not really relevant. Clean curbs, residential trash has never been raised as an issue or a problem on the streets. It's the commercial trash, and that goes back to use group 6 and use group 10 uses. Thank you.
Thank you, Carter. Sylvia, do you want to begin?
Yes, sure. Sorry, I was having a little bit of technical difficulties. Thank you, Carter. On open space, I take your point about the existing kind of DEP sites being allocated for what's already here, and we need to accommodate growth. I think, as I mentioned earlier, as part of that, the environmental analysis, as part of that work, we are required to analyze any adverse impact if that will be generated by residential growth, and through that, if there are adverse impact on open space, I think mitigation will be explored. So that's one avenue, and I think Jennifer did speak a little bit more about how, streets can be leveraged to be used as, public space as well. And I think the bid is doing, separately doing some work on re-envisioning the streets within the confines of the bid boundary. So I think that's important. And to your point about zoning, illegal uses and how, most of the retail uses are already illegal here, so it's not an issue. I would say that, one, in order to make significant changes for business to grow, or add additional uses that may not have been contemplated by the initial, approval, that is still a problem. But I think even more importantly, I think rather than addressing, what uses are illegal here, it's about bringing zoning in line with existing conditions, reflecting that truthfully, and now thinking about the future of the area. I take your point about, allowing use group 6 and use group 10, very broadly. Like I said, I think it is important to have the appropriate amount of flexibility in zoning to support a good mix of different types of retail, small and large, and not be in the way of change and kind of mingle of different types of stores. That being said, we are here and we continue to have these conversations about other tools that can be brought in other than zoning that could resolve some of these other issues, quality of life and related issues. And then with that, I'll turn it over to Jennifer to talk about a little bit more about the neighborhood loading zone.
Sure. Thanks, Sylvia, and thanks, Carter, for your questions. I hear you when you say that neighborhood loading zones won't work everywhere. We have reviewed some potential changes to the parking regulations around the district, and our teams have discussed ways to help facilitate deliveries, reduce the double parking complaints that we've heard, but also allow for passenger and residential parking, while also working to ease congestion on narrow streets. There's a lot of competing interests here for the curb space. And while large scale regulation changes would have to be implemented in a thoughtful, comprehensive manner and would take time for further evaluation, neighborhood loading zones may work in some places. And so I think what it boils down to is the fact that we do have to come up with, and we are tasked with creating, or rather like creating and coming up with creative solutions to ensure that the curb space can be used for both short-term loading activities, for instance, during the day with NLZs, and then allowing that space for residents and passengers to park overnight and on the weekend. But thanks for your comments, and that's something that we'll take back. It's definitely something that the DOT team has been discussing and will continue to further evaluate.
Great, thank you, Jennifer. So next we'll have Zella Jones, and Zella, just be aware that your Zoom screen will close out and pop back up.
Okay, am I on?
Yes.
Oh, good. Okay, so I'm going to address specifically the new container proposal for garbage. NoHo has been investigating this for a very long time, and we would welcome something like that. However, every single block in NoHo is congested with a sidewalk restaurant or a closed street that has where it is applicable, taken away the bike lane spontaneously and reduced traffic to a single lane. Garbage as it's currently collected has been collecting next to restaurant street side locations and is never, never picked up. So I'm vastly unsatisfied with the replies from the Department of Traffic and Transportation regarding some sort of expansion that could possibly in my 100th year occur. But this is so unrealistic. If you start taking up space in the bike lane and the curb lane for garbage disposal for every building in NoHo, you can't have a restaurant. You can't have a closed street. You can't have two-lane traffic. You can't have a place for a delivery vehicle to pull over to the side. So please address this. Thank you.
Thank you for that. So I think, with the clean curbs pilot, what we're looking to do is test the concept to see exactly what kinds of issues may arise. One of the places that we are, in active conversations with, and one of the, the bids that's really interested in this is Union Square Partnership, where they have a lot of, adjacent retail uses. And so that's one of the places that we're looking to test this. Obviously, not in NoHo or even next to NoHo, but a few neighborhoods away. So I think what we'll learn from the pilot is exactly what is the right level of saturation for these. Can you have multiple of these containers in the same neighborhood, or even on the same block? Are bigger containers better, smaller containers? What's the most appropriate sort of design or use for these? So there's, I think, lots of different factors that we can take into account, and we really want to learn and hear feedback from neighborhood residents. I have no doubt that if folks that live near these things don't like them, we'll hear about it.
Great, thanks. Thanks, Craig. So next we will have Margaret Baisley. And Margaret, your Zoom screen will close out and pop back up again. Margaret, are you able to unmute?
There, I think I'm unmuted.
Yes.
I wanted to say first thanks to the City Planning Commission, the DOT and the Department of Sanitation, and all the agencies for your efforts. We support your rezoning efforts. We would like to see legal retail in SoHo and legal residential upstairs. I sit on the board of the SoHo bid. I've been an attorney here for 40 years. I'm the treasurer of my co-op. And my question goes to the support of retail. I know that you've heard a lot of complaints about retail, but there are many retailers, including the Mango store in my building, who are model tenants, who maintain their spaces, who don't have noisy parties, who have reasonable deliveries, and who pay. And that's the important part that I want to emphasize. I represent over 50 co-ops downtown, and we really need the income that comes from retail. Even in co-ops who don't own their spaces downstairs, we still collect substantial sublet fees. And if you want to maintain these beautiful buildings, who's paying for them? The taxes are exorbitant here. The maintenance costs and repair costs in our building alone are over $400,000 this year. And it is the sublet fees from retail. It is the contributions that retail makes that lower maintenance upstairs and enable us to function. So my question specifically is, will you impose conditions on retail that are required to be met, such as a requirement that the deliveries be made overnight? Will businesses be required to buy these garbage collection bins outside, with the idea that the more you impose on retail, the tougher it is to do business here and the fewer retail advantages we will have. Thank you.
Great, thank you, Margaret. Sylvia?
Yes, I can start. Thank you, Margaret, for participating, and thanks for sharing your perspective about retail. And I think your point sort of illustrates the point I was trying to make earlier, that retail size restriction in the zoning is really a bad proxy or bad predictor for good versus bad neighbors. I think you gave a good example. Thanks for that. I think it really comes down to the operational side of things. How do we incentivize or make sure that retailers are good neighbors? And then in terms of the requirements, in terms of imposing requirement to implement these programs, I can open it up for DOT and sanitation to address, but my understanding is that, the idea is that we want to introduce these great programs and incentivize people to participate and be helpful. And I think the bid can be a helpful partner here, but I don't think that there is, maybe for certain programs, but I think for some of the programs, we're not imposing requirements. Jennifer or Greg, do you want to chime in?
Yeah, Sylvia, you're exactly right. The Clean Curbs initiative, currently it's in its pilot stage, so it's totally voluntary. Even in the future, if it were expanded into a larger, more robust, more permanent program, I don't think we'd be looking to make this mandatory. Obviously, the businesses and communities have to know what's right for their business or their community. And, in some places this may make sense, in some places it doesn't make sense. We just want to offer this as another tool that we have to try to improve mobility, try to make our neighborhoods cleaner.
And also, just to add to that, the DOT off-hour delivery program would not be compulsory or required to any effect. And another point is that the neighborhood loading zone, no parking spaces for time of day, no parking areas for the short-term loading activities would not be specific to any one particular business or retailer. It would be open for all of those different types of activities, such as pickup and drop off of passengers, package deliveries by those commercial vehicles, as well as active loading and unloading by passenger vehicles as well.
Great, thank you all. So our last and final speaker is Aaron Carr. And Aaron, your Zoom screen will close out and pop back up again.
Hello, my name is Aaron Carr. I'm the founder and executive director of a nonprofit called Housing Rights Initiative. Our organization has generated over 70 class action lawsuits against predatory landlords and REBNY landlords across New York City. Housing Rights Initiative has long been opposed to this administration's misguided policy of exclusively upzoning low-income neighborhoods, but the potential SoHo rezoning represents an important change in that trend. Therefore, we fully support the idea of creating hundreds of deeply affordable housing units in one of the wealthiest neighborhoods in America. According to the Furman Center, of the city's 59 community districts, SoHo Greenwich Village ranked #1 for median household income, #1 for median condo sales price, #1 for median rent, #1 for school performance, #1 for access to subways, but 48 for racial diversity. Some community members posit that the SoHo plan would be out of character with the neighborhood. However, we argue that the neighborhood of SoHo is out of character with New York City. In a city that is almost 25% Black, SoHo is only 1% Black. It should also be said that the SoHo NoHo rezoning is an opportunity for the residents of SoHo to practice what they preach. In the wake of the murder of George Floyd, Community Board 2 unanimously passed a resolution to, I quote, commit their collective efforts to fostering diverse and inclusive neighborhoods by implementing anti-racist policies. Well, here you go. If done correctly, the SoHo plan would be able to create 900 affordable units at $900 a month for a family of 3 making $38,000 a year in an area where the median asking rent for a 2-bedroom apartment is $8,000 a month. Today, SoHo has just 21 income restricted units. The SoHo plan would result in a 4,000% increase in SoHo's income restricted housing stock. This would undoubtedly reduce racial and economic segregation in one of the most racially and economically segregated neighborhoods in New York City. I don't have any questions at this time, but those are my thoughts. Thank you very much.
Great, thank you so much. So thanks everyone. With that, we're going to go ahead and wrap up. We really appreciate you attending, taking the time out of your evening to participate. We hope that you will join us for our next session, which will be held on March 30th, and will focus on arts and culture. More event information and registration will be posted soon on our website at nyc.gov/SoHo NoHo plan. And again, this session and questions asked will be posted on the website in the next few days. If you do have further questions, feel free to email us at soho-noho@planning.nyc.gov. Thank you and have a good night.